Hello and welcome back to my channel, Chess Captures Chess. In today's episode, episode 47 of the Chess Guide, we are going over pawn breaks. So, hopefully we have understood the last few episodes. Today we were on something else called pawn breaks. So we might have talked this a few times when doing the openings. We're going to still use three openings in this examples here of how pawn breaks work, what they do, why they're good, why might they be bad in some scenarios. So, the three openings today we'll be going over is the first off the Queen's Gambit, because we can do that quite quickly with a pawn break, and then we're going to go over a black opening of the French defence, the advanced variation, and we're also going to go over the English at the end because that's one of the recent ones we've done and there is ways we can do it. So hopefully by the end of this episode we're going to be understanding what they are, how to do them, and how we can make them useful, not just playing them because we found them, for example. So here we're going to have this first example here of the Queen's Gambit. So obviously remembering we played d4 here, followed up by d5. Now straight away there's a few pawn breaks we can do already here. Now obviously the one we're talking about with the Queen's Gambit is c4. Now why is this a pawn break? So a pawn break is where here these two pawns are kind of stuck in the center here. They can't, take each other. They can't move around or anything. So we're almost breaking this sort of tension in the middle. So playing a move like this c4 here, we're attacking this pawn so that if they capture, for example, now these pawns are both free now to, push and do whatever. So we've broken that tension. So that then, we can play our free game here and actually have two pawns here. Now, that's how to do them. Why do we do them? So obviously in a scenario like this, maybe we want to get this pawn here in a Queen's Gambit. You want to have as much centre as possible. So rather than, playing a move like this and maybe, playing a knight move here, trying to attack the centre, like kind of passively, so we're not actually able to take the pawn. Instead here, we're actually forcing our way into the position almost. If they don't do anything about this, they just play Triumph Frenchetto, for example, we can cause quite a lot of havoc in this scenario, like this, for example, where now we've just obtained the centre within a few moves, and now we look much better. So they've got to be careful in scenarios like that. That's why you see a lot of, they're trying to defend the pawn break, for example, here. So if this does happen, we've kind of resulted into that, which you can technically play another pawn break here, but obviously you've got to make sure they're good. Now, why is this not good, for example? So, when you have pawn break, you've got to make sure it's protected. Now, technically this is not protected, but it's going to be very easily captured back with this bishop. We kind of discover this pawn to do it, whereas here, if we played a move like this, they can just take, and it will take a few moves for us to get it back. So we'd have to play something like this, and by then they're still able to protect it, and we're going to struggle getting that pawn for a long while. Now it is a gambit still, so if we might go over that another time, but at the minute I would say don't play it. Stuff like that for a pawn break, it might be a bit risky. Make sure you have it at least when it's protected. We'll go over another way how it's properly protected, but this is kind of, because it's technically not a gambit of the Queen's Gambit here, we are going to win it back very easily here without much trouble. So that is, hopefully you understand a few things about it now. We're just going to go over the next two examples here. So French defence, you see this a lot in my rapid increase because for some reason we've been getting black a lot of the time, so obviously we're used to this, hopefully. And this is where they play e5. Now there's two pawn breaks in the French we go over. Now one of them you do a lot later, and there's reasons for this. So the first one, the main one, especially after in the French, if they play a move like this, you are kind of obliged to, almost, you forcefully have to play this c5 move. It's the only way to keep the centre with black here. As we see, this is a huge pawn break. This is kind of the fundamental example of one. As, everything's blocked in here, and this pawn here, we're just trying to, capture into that centre now. That's why you see a lot here of this, where they defend the pawn break again. So then you have these sort of moves, everyone's protecting this centre. You might see this bishop's come out and everything. And now here, let's say you got to this position and you think, I could play another pawn break. I want to try and go for the centre. We do not play this straight away, f6 for the French. because there's many reasons. Firstly, already the evaluation has put us at 0.7 points down already, so we're just under a point down as black, so we do not like this already. And the reason is that they don't have to capture, because now our knight is incredibly weak. We can't move there anymore, and we kind of have to stay there. If they captured, for example, sure, we're in a much better position now. We've got our knight out with a tempo. But if they just leave this, they just castle, we can't put our knight here, because they're just going to capture. Now we've ruined our king structure. We have to castle queenside, which is quite difficult with this whole open line here. So that's why I would leave it till very late. So, play moves like this, if we just go over a few, you might see this happen a lot, where we get all of this. I know there might be some moves here that aren't the best, we're just going through them all. And you might have to deal with this. I mean, maybe before we could have played something like this, where you have this whole thing. But hopefully, we're doing it very late, as you see. Because the reason is here, we have to get castled first, almost. And not even really now, but we can technically. We're going to say we can, because they can take this now, and our bishop takes. Now, obviously, we do lose this pawn here, but realistically, it's very difficult to do this pawn break. Mainly for one reason, and that's just because it's so... You've got to get the right position, because as we saw there, when we tried to play it early on, we got our kingside completely obliterated there, and it was just not, good. We couldn't castle kingside. So, you've got to make sure you play the pawn breaks at the right time. See ahead, so remember the house calculate. Try to calculate a bit further, making sure that the pawn break you can firstly recapture after they take the pawn, and also what happens if they don't take and they try and protect it. Are you going to ruin, piece development? Are you going to waste tempo? All of that stuff. So there is that. Now the last example we're going to go over here is the newly opening we just went over last time out, and the learn the openings, which was the English. Now the one we're going to go over here, it's very, very kind of Queen's Gambit like almost, because obviously the English, we play c4 straight away. If they play c5, which is the symmetrical English, we can play a move of d4. Now this has got the term the Benoni. This is used a lot. Now it's a little bit different in the which way they play it normally, but this could technically be a pawn break. It's not really for the center this time. Pawn breaks don't have to be trying to get the center, it's just that's what's really best to do. We don't really want to play a pawn break on the edge of the board over here, because we're not really fighting for anything. So really we want to obtain really a pawn break in any of these sort of squares. Like at the start of the game, I would say these are the sort of areas here which we'd want to try and obtain. So try and get that. We could even say this outside area here as well. This could be sort of what we would want as well. But here, for example, if there was this capture, you see this a lot here, and this would be the type of thing. We have a centre with our pawn, and we have an open queen. It's not the worst, but sometimes people play this. This you could play e4 straight after here. There might be this sort of thing, and now we've definitely got a centre here of d5 looking very protected. So there's all of that. You could probably come up with many here. Technically, there's a pawn break here. You've just got to make sure they're always protected. That's the main thing here. So that will be it for today's video. Hopefully you understand what pawn breaks are now, why they're useful, and how not to use them. And hopefully by time now you're using the openings, hopefully you remember as well that, if you want to try and use this, I would say don't try in a game straight away, because again, you don't know what's going to happen entirely. I've just shown you 3 examples that most likely might happen in an opening. If it happens midway through, you might be going in blind. So try against a bot, try against an analysis thing, try against anything. There's many websites out there nowadays that have engines you can play against, Stockfish and all of this. So try that. Sometimes real opponents always play different moves that you might want. It's always frustrating that you want to play a new opening, and then they, like a new d4 opening, and then they play e4 or some sort. So there's that. So that is it for today's video. So thank you, and bye bye.